today I'm going to go through, basically try to give the philosophy, tease our approach, understand where we're coming from at peerdom, introducing some of the features of peerdom through the lens of a couple of the companies that we work with. So I'd like to jump just through a couple examples and kind of indicate like which types of situations and contexts lead to this tool being of use. And we'll try to do that without belaboring too much, and maybe without going into every menu and clicking through every button to show what there is. And rather, I would like to leave the space for conversation and for discussions and questions, which can then take us deeper into the software and what's possible and what's not possible and what is on our roadmap and this type of stuff. So I will actually I'd like to start at the beginning. It seems sort of like the logical place to begin. peerdom is a tool that was built out of a need inside of a web design and development agency called Nothing. And Nothing is based in Bern in Switzerland. And it's about, I think at the time when peerdom was being created, around 15 or 18 people working for Nothing. And the idea was that until about 15 to 18 people, the organizational design aspects and who was responsible for what and the structure per se was completely implicit. So there was nothing defined, and everyone until that point, for the most part, could keep in their head who was responsible for what, pretty much, who was doing what, and there were starting to become more and more problems with that because of confusion and maybe diffusion of responsibility, two people thinking the other was responsible for something and so forth. And in this context where there was no real organization design, more of like a startup context in some sense, where people are just doing things and it seems to work out. They had what they would, I guess, call a flat hierarchy, but that pretty much just meant undefined. And in that undefined context, they started to grow and need some clarity. And in this type of context, I think the very first thing that we were looking for was, okay, how can we make explicit what our organizational structure is and who's responsible for what? And then also, define in some sense what our purpose is and what we're looking to achieve together. So gain some sort of alignment as a team. And given that, we kind of plunged a bit into the literature, which, I mean, maybe most theoreticians do to begin with. And we came across Sociocracy and Holacracy and several other organizational design theories, and took quite a bit of inspiration from those. When we were deciding how to move forward from that, we realized that actually we wanted to kind of take bits and pieces from a number of the different readings that we'd had. We liked, for instance, I don't know, check-in rounds from this practice, or little other tools like we liked that notion of having a constitution, but we didn't really want to copy and paste a constitution that was already fully written somehow. And so we started to, like, over time, Frankenstein our own organizational model together. And this need for having an explicit responsibilities and explicit organizational structure and sharing that was still there, without, we didn't have like an answer for it. So if we wanted to to run holacracy. We knew that there were tools that could help us do that, and at the time there was nothing that allowed us to just simply view our organizational structure. So this is the context in which Nothing built its own internal tool, and this was a tool that we used completely internally just for our team. And I guess now actually is a good time for me to share my screen, because I guess that's something that we're going to be looking at today. Pull that up. So this is kind of the result, or the current, where we are currently at Nothing with our organization design. And this is obviously within peerdom, the way that Nothing has expressed its organization design. Peerdom at its base is just a tool that allows organizations to express their organization design and map out visually, making explicit who's responsible for what, defining kind of the boundaries of the organization. What does this organization do? What does it not do? Why does each team exist? Why does each role exist? In some sense, it's setting up all of the boundaries that give constraints within which all of the other types of work can happen. So it starts to take like all of the vagueness and frame it. And in that sense, that frame gives clarity to the team. Of course, to begin with, what we wanted to do was, we're a design company. So our idea was, okay, we like to do rapid prototyping and kind of pop out ideas and iterate quickly on them. And we found that going through too many processes, like having to construct our organization design through a series of governance meetings or through a series of tensions and proposals, was going to be a little bit too slow for us in some sense. There was going to be too much in between what we wanted to achieve and the processes by which that we could get to them. So in some sense, we built something that is kind of a tool that allows for rapid prototyping. So it allows for quickly expressing something, like starting with a blank slate, creating circles and roles, moving them around, copying them, having this ability to like have a canvas that you can quickly throw down an organization design and experiment with different alternatives. So we did this, and I guess this is a good point for me to just show a couple of the very basics of the tool, which cover these needs that we had. So like I said at the time, it's about making something explicit. So when you look at peerdom, what you have is the entire organization is englobed obviously in this circle. So the main circle is the organization, and it has a purpose that needs to be defined. Going further, each of the sub-circles is basically a collection of roles, which we'll go into afterward. But each of those sub-circles is also defined with its own purpose. And the idea is that this cascading of purpose, even down to the definition of a role, will always force one to be explicit about why does this role or circle, or why does our organization exist, and it should stimulate the kinds of thought processes by which you're defining what it is you do, and really reflecting upon, is this necessary or not. So on the left-hand side, you see very quickly the details for each of those different levels. You can kind of explore in and out. The notion is, again, you have a purpose which is defined at the level, and then you see who's involved in that. So at this most outer level, you have a set of peers who are holding roles, and I'll get into that in a moment, at that level. But you also see who's involved at the deeper levels, so you can kind of quickly get an idea of who's involved in which circles. So if you jump into the business circle, there are 9 different peers who are there. In this development circle, there are 6 peers, etc. And then going down kind of the next list, at the circle level and also down into the role level, there's the ability to define responsibilities or accountabilities. And these are also a way of specifying very specifically why does that role exist, and what is that person holding the role responsible for. I won't go, because we're in the context of sociocracy, I realize I'm now speaking a little bit vaguely or maybe too generically about roles and so forth. So I will also allow, or I will also now just like dive in a little bit deeper. Like, we hold the notion of a role being able to have multiple role holders, which is a classic role definition. And again, each person is represented by a number of roles. So one of the ways that you can see how a person is represented by their roles is by clicking on this side. And by clicking on that side, as I move around, you can see that different roles are highlighted across the organization. So that person is represented as a collection of their roles, and as you go and look further, you can see which roles they actually hold from the outer level, let's say. So a person is a collection of roles, and a role is a potential collection of people. And with those fundaments, that filled our needs in order to make explicit who's doing what and give a definition of purpose that we could all collect around and start to actually nail down some of this vague, implicit, non-definedness into something concrete. The idea of the second notion that I said about rapid prototyping is really just a matter of, okay, when you want to edit your organizational map, there should be as little friction between what you're doing and the result as possible. So we have a couple, let's say, features which facilitate quick creation. So if I wanted to add a circle or a role or a peer, that can be done quite rapidly. So we'll just do this really quickly. So you can see, as you're defining a circle at this level, you put in several details, but again, the requirements are that it has a name and a purpose, because without a purpose, maybe it shouldn't exist. And the ability to add notes. These notes we usually use as to link to other materials, perhaps documentation or other tools that you're using. And those are, again, defined for circle. In this case, we're defining a new circle, but that can also be done at the role level. Things like adding colors or making more specific domains of control, or adding specific policies for specific conditions. All of these details I won't go into at the moment, but we can talk about in the discussion if you'd like. And like I said, you add a circle, and then, sorry, I have to hide my thing here that's hiding in a corner behind. Okay, then this tiny circle is here now, and within it we can add a role, for instance. And I'm just going to add it very rapidly, just so that you can kind of get the notion of how fast it can be to build something from scratch and to play around with it. So with these roles, we can quickly build a new structural element, a circle, and some roles within it, also with their definitions. And then we can also, as we're, again, in the spirit of rapid prototyping, take that test circle and move it around. So if I want to move it into the design circle, you can go into the circle, and when we edit that, there's the ability to move a circle into any of the other circles in the organization. And what that will do then effectively is, within the design circle, we'll now find that circle. So the idea is, again, make things quickly, move them around, shape them, and allow yourself to build a design without having to process it through a set of rules. Now, of course, there are, after creating a draft and having something which is used as your organizational structure, there are questions that will arise about how that map becomes living and how it will evolve, and which procedures and processes one should follow in order to make it alive. But we leave that up to every organization to define how it wishes to do so. So far, all of the organizations that we work with have their own methods for keeping this map alive and for determining under which contexts the map is allowed to be edited, who has the right to do so, under which conditions, and which processes they follow in order to do so. So we have some organizations who will update their maps just by almost dictatorship. So having one person who is the map maintainer and will be in charge of moving that around. Others will use maybe holocratic principles, so or sociocratic meetings in order to update their maps. So this wide variety of different ways of updating and editing the map we leave to, in terms of the human side, so allowing the organization to define its own way of doing that without imposing a set of rules or a procedure that one has to go through for it. I should also just mention, now that we're still talking about this kind of rapid prototyping aspect, there is this kind of new feature that we also have, which is a part of the rapid prototyping that involves copying a role, and that is another fast way of, if I'd like to move it into to continuously copy and take that information that I've already used and keep making new copies of it. That's one thing that we can do in order to quickly build up your map. But we also have a notion of building roles which appear in multiple places on your map continuously. So if you actually look at these roles which are in color, so this role is a guide role, which has a special significance in our organization design. Namely, they're the representative of the circle and the one with very particular accountabilities. But the accountabilities that are found for that guide role are the same as the accountabilities found for the guide role here, and the same as over here, etc. And because that role is appearing in multiple circles with the same accountabilities, this has a kind of special status for us. And when copying this type of role, you can create these structural roles, these mirrored roles that end up being all tied together. And when they're tied together, that means that if you make changes to that role, they will then propagate basically to everywhere else. So if I change the guide color just from green to red, just as an example really quickly, it's warning me that will change it everywhere. And when we look out, now all of them are red. So the idea is they're all tied together, and as you make changes to one, they'll change elsewhere. So this is another type of role which can allow for a lot of expressibility. So if you have someone who's kind of the responsible for the circle that appears in every circle, they can share the same accountabilities, and it would just be a different role holder in principle in each of them. So this idea is, that really goes through, I think, the main needs that we had. We wanted to have a minimal amount of processes, a minimal amount of friction in the way, and basically force ourselves to create some clarity in a time where we were undefined. And so the tool kind of emerged as an internal need. And after we used it for about 6 months internally, we had a company contact us, I think through a mutual organizational coach, who asked us if we would be willing to help them develop the tool for themselves. And in this organization, so I'm going to kind of hop to the next part of the story. So this was our first client, which is called Bread for All in English. It's an organization based in Bern, Switzerland, who is working in business and human rights, in agriculture and climate, in land grabbing. So they're not doing the land grabbing, obviously. They're trying to prevent others from land grabbing, and working in terms of educating on fair consumption. This organization came to us with a need of saying, hey, we are basically incredibly slow right now as a nonprofit. We have too many meetings, there's a lot of bureaucracy, and we need to change the way that we're organizing. I believe that they went through some form of a organization facilitation. They had, actually that was the person who put us in touch with them, was an organizational coach. And he recommended a kind of role-based approach. They at first defined all of their roles and the responsibilities and who was doing what, and put it into a static Excel sheet, which was sitting on a server. And that worked out for them until they realized that basically nobody looked at that sheet. And when you were faced with a huge matrix of text, it's pretty unactionable. So they asked us just to, I should mention that actually at that point, they also were holding governance meetings, and they had their own constitution that was sort of loosely based on holacracy. And they had started to implement other self-management processes, but they came to us with really saying, our need is to take that static Excel sheet and make people understand what that means visually. So when they came to us with this, they basically were looking for a shared platform where all of the employees could come together and have a visual understanding, more or less, of what the company, what the organization is doing and how it's structured. But furthermore, to really understand who was doing what. Again, kind of similar need to what Nothing had, but they were slightly more complex in size. So there were some other needs that arose there, and a couple of features that in peerdom that also came with the added complexity of having about 3 or 4 times more employees within the organization. So again, it's the same concept as you click around, you see that different people hold different roles, and those roles can be scattered across different circles. There's a notion at this scale of understanding who is actually, how charged are people with roles. Like, I mean, I could sit here and count the number of roles that each person is holding and see, kind of have an understanding more or less, but we decided to add this bar, which basically is a summary of all of the different employees and how many roles each of them holds, in order for a couple of cases. First, to see, okay, why is this person holding 16 roles and someone else 1? Does that make sense? Kind of it can signal certain feedback loops that might need to be signaled. Not saying that 1 versus 16 roles is good or bad. I'm just saying that type of feedback can be useful. And then also, very importantly, to understand when people are maybe not holding roles. And so that's something that came with this kind of extra scale of people. And another very important feature that came with that is these kind of grayed out roles, which you're seeing. And The grayed out roles, so if we look, are actually roles that do not have someone holding the role. So as you look at the organization from a kind of bird's eye view, you can quickly spot which roles are currently being unheld. And if it has been the case that you've defined that these roles should exist for the thriving of your company, then that should signal some red flags to say, okay, why are these not being filled? And can we not put them up on a kind of marketplace and say who's willing to take on this role because we actually have a need for it. So this is a nice way of understanding quickly what roles are unfilled, and any of the people responsible in their own circle can quickly look and say, okay, what is not being fulfilled yet? I should also mention that that Brot for Allah, or this bread for everyone, bread for all, was also actually using other tools to their behest. So they have they're running governance meetings and addressing things through tensions and doing all sorts of other practices on the side, which are not actually handled within peerdom. But for them, again, this kind of way of piecing together that what was already currently working for them, but augmenting the kind of visual and interactive component of what they were trying to do was exactly what they needed for everyone to kind of intuitively understand what they were looking at. So one of the other challenges with this organization is that it, unlike At Nothing, which was a web agency filled with designers and developers who have a pretty good understanding of operating systems and who understand how you might set a series of rules and processes. In this particular sector, the diversity of the employees was quite, it was quite diverse. And because of this, they really appreciated the fact that peerdom is somehow intuitive and doesn't require too much, doesn't have too much jargon about all the processes involved in sociocracy or in holacracy, and it kind of, they could jump right in and start clicking around and understand the organization design almost as if it was a translation of a classical organogram into a sort of more interactive form. From there, I'm going to actually move to our final example, which is another non-governmental organization or charitable organization called Vel Africa. And Vel Africa is Vel Africa is an organization who basically repurposes lost bicycles and dying bicycles, fixes them up, and then ships them to rural areas in Africa. And they go there and help educate people about how to repair bicycles and set up bicycle repair shops, and try to provide bicycles to people who usually would have to walk great distances between places. They also came to us with a kind of similar story. As they grew and grew and grew, the founders realized that all of the responsibility was being dumped on them, and at some point they were becoming a bottleneck because, like in most of these hierarchically organized companies, the responsibility always falls on the same person. So in their case, they also had read something about holacracy, but really were looking for the ability to define something clearly and share that with their team. Again, just a very simple need: define the structure, lay out explicitly who's responsible for what, and share it with everyone. So again, coming back to that, they needed to be able to mix peerdom with their internal processes, which were quite loosely defined. So I don't believe that they're running very strict meetings or using too many of the other processes of self-management. They're mostly involved and interested in being able to have a lay of the land about what work is being done and who's responsible for that work. So they also have created their own internal constitution, which was loosely based on other constitutions, again, an amalgam of constitutions, and found that I think actually at the time they had tried mapping out their organization using other tools and just found that having to go through the processes was too much. So with them, they also had a kind of two interesting additional elements to their organization design that I'm going to highlight in this. So in particular, these roles which appear in multiple places that I introduced earlier. So these kind of mirror roles are more structural ones. In this case, they have a coordinator in each circle, which is in green. They wanted to be able to elect these people in a kind of representative democracy type way, and this allowed or encouraged us also to add a feature which has this kind of election notion. Now, we don't declare how the elections are going to go down, and we don't have a set of features which do online voting for elections or something. We prefer, in general, that that's done in a kind of human type way amongst themselves, and that the result is just uploaded to the tool. So this representative democracy aspect can be introduced by elected roles, and another kind of interesting aspect of this, or actually I'm going to just hop into one other feature that I forgot to mention earlier, or aspect of the software, is this notion of being able to go and see in detail what an individual is involved in. There's a peer page for everyone as well, which highlights all of the different roles that they're involved in and all of their responsibilities on an individual level. In this kind of textual way, there's also, I should say, a role list, and this role list is nothing more than a tabular view which shows all of the different roles in a kind of different in a different tabular presentation. So Valafrica has basically told us that one of the important aspects of using peerdom for them was that, yeah, the setup time was very quick, and they didn't have to really attach themselves to too much baggage or follow any rules in creating this. And they like the aspect of being able to update their map freely without having to pass through some sort of procedure. The idea of the tool is, again, be as lightweight as possible and get as little in the way of getting something done. We also have a notion from the beginning that the user interface, we'd like to be very accessible and understandable, even for people who do not come from an organizational design background or having read any of the theory behind different organizational designs or structures. We do, however, we are currently working on the ability to make the user interface more complex. And one way that it can become more complex is to activate different modules which add additional complexity to the interface. So by starting with something simple, which we believe is really the pure starting point for any organization that they could do today, which is map out responsibilities and define your purpose. From there, we have a number of different modules which will can be progressively turned on or off depending on the needs of each organization and how they want to make a further complex representation of their organization design through software. So that, just to give you a really quick example, which is quite illustrative, we have this additional let me see. In this instance, there's no notion of missions, but by turning on the missions module or application, we have a very simple application here, which allows each of the peers in your map to define their own personal mission as well. So this is just a quick add-on that maybe doesn't work or need to be there for every organization, but they have the ability to add that into there and add additional elements to the user interface. But our overall goal is to only introduce complexity when the organization feels ready to add that complexity, and needs to and has a kind of a progressive needs. This idea really came from a lot of conversations that we had, especially if we came from having we dove really deeply into the theory of organization design. And when I would go out and speak with different people, I realized very quickly how it became like a half hour or an hour education lesson to introduce all of these concepts. And we asked ourselves if it's going to always be necessary to come in with so many new concepts, or can we not start at something that everybody understands and only add complexity as necessary. So this kind of modular approach and modular complexity is underlying our philosophy and our principles. But at the base, it's just a very simple mapping tool. And that's all I've prepared right now, and I'd like to open up for questions and discussion, because I am more than happy to plunge into any of the details I've glossed over.
Let me ask two things that I want to make sure I ask, and then there's the questions in the chat, and you're welcome to write your questions in the chat so that we can track what questions there are. Pricing structure and integrations. Those are the two keywords that I would like. Yeah.
Two nice words. The pricing is quite straightforward at the moment. We're showing one price basically of €4 per peer per month. That translates into different currencies differently. It costs a bit more if you pay monthly rather than annually. And there are reductions for non-governmental organizations, charitable foundations, cooperatives. And we also are amenable to discussion if funds are really tight. We're very friendly on finding ways that we can mutually benefit. I think one of the last things that we want is pricing to get in the way of producing purposeful work. Integrations was the second word. At the moment, we have the most basic integration is this idea of being able to link anything to anything through these notes sections. We are currently also integrating with several of our clients, in the more enterprise clients, with other databases. So this is Active Directory type integrations. This is usually for larger enterprises who already have a database, an employee database. Otherwise, there are hundreds that are on our to-do list, but we're really trying to prioritize them as the needs arise. I have to admit that as we talk to different people, we keep tallying things, and so far we've found ways to work around a lot of things without having to overcomplicate our lives.
I like that. Well, I'm just going to read the questions from the chat, if that's okay. The different meaning, the meaning of the colors for roles is one of the question here.
Yeah. So the meaning of the color is arbitrary. It's only okay. Maybe I can give you a quick legend. I covered a couple of them earlier, but the fact that this is green and this is purple and this is red doesn't mean anything other than this green is the same as this green is the same as this green and this one. And that again is a special type of role which is appearing in multiple circles, which has the same accountabilities and the same purpose. And it's just appearing in multiple places. So we're calling these mirror roles. So they're mirrored across the entire organization. The gray roles are roles which do not have a holder currently. The beige ones are roles which do have holders. And that pretty much covers all of the different color types. Now, like I said, there is also, I mean, it can be kind of confusing because you have the ability as well to go into any role in principle and edit the role and change the color of it. So if I wanted to, I could make that role blue really quickly. And when I make it blue, then if that blue doesn't mean anything to me, then it's probably not a smart move to make. Ideally, color is an added dimension of adding meaning to your map, and we leave that up to the users of it to define their own meaning. We just give a palette upon which they can express themselves.
Thank you. Sophie, what do you mean by have you thought about mapping skills? Maybe it's clear to Nathan, but it's not clear to me. But what do you mean?
No, it's just I was raising the question when you mentioned the add-ons or the new modules you're developing, like the personalization of people. What I've noticed in working in a sociocratic way or in this kind of organization is that at some point you have confusion about who has the skill to do what. And when you want to create a new project, being able to like sort people not just based on their roles, but on their skills is a very powerful tool. And I'm thinking about at least three organizations in which it would be super meaningful. So it's just, have you ever thought about that?
Absolutely. So this is one of the modules that we're considering to develop, but we haven't started to develop it yet. It is it's not an obvious question either. How to define different levels of skill is a really difficult problem. Another one is upon which dimensions to define those skills and how that aligns with the responsibilities in a role. That being said, yeah, we've actually absolutely started to consider it. I've also started looking at other companies. I know actually there's one in Geneva which is doing skill mapping, and I'm curious to learn more about that, but we don't have that currently in the software. It's a very good example of the type of module that if it is a recurring need, we also have a kind of alternative business model, let's say, where if we can pool together 3 or 4 organizations who say, look, we really need skill mapping, and they understand that they need that, then what we do is we say, okay, here's our estimation for what it takes to develop and design just that module. And if they split the costs across that, they can have reductions on their subscription fees and basically forward the product in the direction they would like it to move. So this is also something worth mentioning, but that requires the buy-in of the companies to say, hey, we really want the software to be able to do this as well.
Well, I'll get back to you because I first need to have a talk with other organizations. I've seen this need emerging, so I'll get back
Yeah,
to you on that.
with pleasure. Yeah, anytime.
Have we already covered why some peers have no roles? That's a question.
That we would have to speak to the organizations themselves. Why they don't? Okay, well, one example is somebody who just was hired. I think it's strange to be hired without any roles, but some might not have a role, and during the first week they assign themselves to them. I don't know. Another example might be the inverse, that someone had roles and slowly over time they're phasing them out for whatever reason, maybe through, yeah, hopefully not because they were bad at them and people suggested that somebody else hold the role and they lose their roles until they basically don't exist in the organization anymore. But that's possible. I don't know. I would guess those coming in and those going out.
Could also just be somebody on sabbatical, maternity leave, and so on. Right?
Another very good explanation.
Hold on, I lost my here. How many people does it need to start? Like, what is the minimum and a maximum number of people or roles, depending on how you want to answer it?
Yeah, so we can start at the minimum. I actually spoke with somebody today who was he was the first person that I'd spoken to who was really interested in using peerdom as an individual. And I hadn't actually considered one peer map before, because I always was thinking, okay, it's a collaborative tool amongst different peers. But his point was, as a freelancer, he's often working associatively with lots of different companies and with external workers, and sometimes there are projects with this person or that one. And his idea was, I would love to organize my life in some way using this tool, but by giving people access to the fact that they are somehow this satellite in my life. So I would say, I mean, if you'd asked me yesterday, I would have said maybe 2 or 3, and now I will go down to 1 for a minimum. For a maximum, let me try to think about how to answer that. I mean, theoretically, there is no maximum. Now, as you scale up, as everyone knows, there are technical issues that can arise with scaling. So the largest map that we ever created had something like 800 or 900 roles. And because it's, yeah, like at that point, each of these roles starts to become microscopic in some sense, and you have to zoom in for it to even make sense. It's theoretically possible to have as many roles as necessary and as many people as necessary. But like I said, the scaling comes with other problems. If you look at this bar and you have 10,000 employees, who wants to scroll through 10,000 employees? So we also have several modules which we're building to support larger enterprises. And in that case, we have to rethink about several of the aspects of the user interface to support larger numbers of people. But there is we don't hold a minimum or maximum.
Those are the questions in the chat. Are there more questions? Other questions? There you go. Can you give some examples of the day-to-day uses and advantages of the tool as opposed to a more static organizational chart?
Absolutely, yeah. So I think one of the main uses, I think, is almost educational. So in a lot of organizations, people are so ingrained and used to working in a kind of traditional static hierarchy organization design that actually nobody even thinks about organization design, because that's just assumed when somebody thinks about how an organization is designed. Like that's like the natural reflex. And in order to break through that reflex a little bit, it, I think, requires a tool which is somehow engaging and interacting and interactive in some sense. So if you are, if you're clicking around and exploring and discovering what the organization is doing and understanding who is in a certain team and what this person is doing and what that person is doing and what your whole company is doing, in some sense, there's this aspect of discovery and exploration that I think you can't get from a static chart. Another one is purely in looking forward into new ways of working together. So we know that by taking one person and assigning them to being defined as one role or one title is incredibly limiting to some degree. If you, let's say, you say that that person is doing a bad job, if they're doing a bad job at any one of their responsibilities, then it falls onto their job title or who they are. If instead they're defined as a collection of roles, then they can do a bad job at just one of their 10 roles, and in principle maybe have a better fit for that, for taking on a different role, or just not doing that and concentrating on the other ones. So it starts to, this type of moving away from a static chart into a dynamic, or into an environment where somebody can be represented by a number of different roles, in some sense requires having a dynamic tool, because again, if one person is 10 different roles, and over time they take new roles on and leave other ones, and that type of complexity is not only happening at the individual level, but for all of the people in the organization, then all of a sudden there's enough dynamic activity and evolution going on in the organization that there has to be some sort of point of reference, or a common platform where everybody has the ground truth about what's going on currently, a snapshot of what's happening. And that is absolutely not going to happen if you have an organogram in a PDF on a server stored somewhere, and that you, every time there's a change, you update and then send out through email. So those are some of the like major advantages of having a kind of dynamic platform. But on a day-to-day basis as well, our hope is that by mapping out your organization and mapping out the different initiatives that are going on, and by showing your entire team what is happening across the entire organization, that's going to open up a lot of synergies that otherwise wouldn't have been there before. So one good example might be, I mean, I can give a personal story. I started at the design and development agency as a developer, actually as a software developer. And over time, I became interested, because of being an English speaker, I became interested in helping out with some of the communications in English. And so I took on a role in our communications team. And after that, I started to become interested in, I don't know, business communications. And so I sort of seeped into the business team as well. And this ability for me to see what different roles exist across the entire organization outside of the team that I'm working in, and to have a very like high level view of all of the different stuff going on within the organization, is of incredible benefit for someone who wants to sculpt and shape their own job. It can, especially for those who have initiative and who are going to be seeking to find that the thing that fits best with their passions. This type of platform can really permit somebody who's normally would just have the vision of like kind of tunnel vision, like what their team is doing, maybe who the leader of the department is or whatever, but to understand and to be able to explore what others are doing in completely different geographic regions or in completely different teams, and see what initiatives need help. So what roles are unfilled. That's of tremendous benefit if everyone has that type of access. So on a day, those are the potential benefits from being able to see everything from a high level, and especially for sharing your organization design with the whole team rather than just the strategy team or the C-level people or the founders or whatever.
I agree, very much so. The more decentralized things are, the more communication and having that kind of access to who does what is absolutely essential. Everybody struggles with that, so this is very useful.
Yeah, I think
yeah.
we've established that in some sense as being the very first step. I can't. We spend a lot of time because trying to reduce the complexity of like a complex organization design. Something, I mean, the way that we organize ourselves is quite radical in some sense, and in a lot of ways it changes a lot of different aspects of the way that we collaborate. I mean, it opens cans of worms in terms of compensation models, in terms of how we give feedback to one another, in terms of how we hold meetings. There was a lot coming at once, and when we speak with organizations, I think if we look at what the red thread is and what should just be common in every organization, it's just like at the basis, everyone should understand what the organization's doing, who's responsible for what, and who do I go to if I have an idea. And that, I think that's what's really permitted by having a kind of intuitive and simple tool that's accessible for everyone from the beginning. After that, of course, there are lots of really fun things you can do to add complexity toward that, but that doesn't have to be all done at the beginning.
Any last questions?
Fantastic.
You've answered everything. Oh, so, and did you say that? Because I know that there's, so now if, especially people who are watching the recording, they want to go try something, where do they go?
Great question. So at our website, which is peerdom.org, you can, oh, that's not how it will look for you because there you are. You can contact us. That's, I think, the best way. I still really prefer at this stage to speak with everyone and learn as much as I can about what different organizations are up to, how they're organizing, what their specific needs are, because I still believe very firmly that adopting a tool is like, it's useless. It's not the right fit if it's not the right context. And that's kind of what I was hinting at about the origins of the companies that we're working with. If they come to us and they say, hey, we want peerdom to operate, like to run our entire holacratic organization, then I would say there are probably tools which are better fit for you, given your needs. And yeah, that long story to say that at this moment we can still take the precious time to have quick conversations. So you can contact us through this. We offer a 1-month free trial for any organization who wishes to get started. And yeah, I think all the information should be here. I should also mention that we've just recently put up on our website this showcase, which is a number of different companies who have opened their organization design for the public. And this we're hoping to continue to add to, and we actually offer rebates for companies who are willing to open up and become transparent with that. These are going to be, we're hoping to build kind of a useful repository of information where people can go and learn how others are defining rules, how others are collaborating with one another, and share information amongst one another.
Terrific. Thank you.
Thank you, well, for being there.